Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. We're on episode 3 of Bungo Stray Dogs. Man, oh my gosh. These last 2 episodes have been really, really good. It's crazy. So I guess I don't consider this a spoiler, but some of you in the comments at the end of season 1 said, oh, well, the next thing, it's going to be the next arc, and it's 4 episodes long. And I was like, there's a part of me that's like, I didn't want to know how long it was, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be 2 episodes or 3, and now I know it's 4. So I guess it's not a spoiler, but I was like, oh, okay, so now I kind of know a timeline, which it's not a spoiler because you didn't tell me what's going to happen, but I now know that it's 4 episodes, so we're halfway through it. So far, though, it's been so good getting to see Dazai's past, seeing how he was different while being an executive in the Port Mafia versus how he is in the present time, especially in relation to his subordinates, Akutagawa versus Atsushi. Like, it's such a difference, but it also helps explain a lot of Dazai's actions and why he is the way that he is. But also Oda. I freaking love Oda. He may be one of my favorite characters in this show so far, which is sad because he's gonna die. Like, I know that he's gonna die. There's too many death flags. There's too much. I just know. Y'all don't have to spoil me. I just know. It's like these types of characters, and I'm trying not to get my hopes up. I know it's gonna be sad, but I know he's not gonna die from poison. No, that's not how he's going down. So my guess is that Dazai comes in to save him, because Dazai was going to meet him where Ango and Oda were, and Oda just went too soon. So that's my guess, is that Dazai comes in and saves him, but I don't know the circumstance. At this point, Ango's gotten away with what looks like Mimic, and we still don't know. I'm not totally convinced about Ango. I'm like, is Ango Gide? Is Gide someone different? Is Ango with, Mimic alone? Is he actually with the Port Mafia? Is this all like, I said last reaction, I'm like, is he a double agent, triple agent? What is the story with Ango? What is Ango's angle? But I don't know. I didn't research Ango's power for this episode because I wasn't sure if we were going to get to see him use his ability or not. So I'm going to hold off. And if we don't see it this episode, then I will probably, since our flashback is apparently going to end next episode after this, then for episode 4, I'll probably research Ango and do that. I'm not researching Mori's power yet. I had some people ask in the comments, like, oh, you could research Mori's power. Y'all have been saying Mori is a giant spoiler, and I don't want to be spoiled. So I'm going to save it and wait on Mori till later. I can do that. I'm sure we'll have other members of the guild, other members of the agency, or whatever come through the woodworks, and I can research them. But I'm going to wait on Mori. But next episode, I may do Ango, just because his thing is, it's something of decadence. I want to research that. But I want to wait till after this episode first. But yeah, so lots of fun stuff happening this season so far. I really am liking this flashback. I also like that it's based off a light novel. Somebody was in the comments saying that these first couple of episodes that are the flashback are based on a light novel, and they've adapted it, and they said they've adapted another light novel in this series, and then there's 2 more they have not adapted. So don't spoil me on those. I just think it's interesting to know that. It definitely fits that this is a light novel adaptation because it is different than the show and what I assume is the manga material. It's different, just the tone, the writing, everything is a little bit different. So I'm assuming that attributes to the fact that it's a light novel, that it's adapted from a text rather than a manga. That makes a lot more sense. So yeah, fun times. But let's dive in and see what all happens this episode with our dear Oda, who is our narrator. I'm like, if he dies from the poison, are they going to switch over to Dazai to be the narrator? I don't know. But we are going to find out here. Let's start this bad boy. We are going to start episode 3. And I want to note that it's a little different translation from the preview of last episode. At the preview of episode 2, it said a room where we can view the seaside. And in this, it's a room where we can view the ocean, where we can someday see the ocean, which sounds like ideals. It sounds like the idealistic thing, like you'd want to end up like, oh, one day we'll have a room by the ocean and we can see everything. And it's kind of like that. It's kind of like a forlorn, like, oh, we're going to hope for this idealistic future that's like a fairy tale ending, but it's not going to happen. Death flags, I'm telling y'all. So, anyway, we're going to start episode 3 of Bungo Stray Dogs here in 3, 2, 1, let's go. What the heck? Okay. Damn it! That was my favorite episode so far up until the last 30 seconds. And it's still my favorite episode so far of this flashback, but oh, my heart like fell to my stomach. And I am so heartbroken for Oda. It's official, y'all. Oda is my favorite character in this show, which sucks because guess what? He's gonna die. Oh God, I hate it. Yeah, at this point, it is cemented that Oda is going to die in the next episode. To me, it is cemented because of everything this episode has done to lead us up to that conclusion. And I gotta go through this episode again because there were so many good one-liners. There were so many good one-liners, and there were so many like just symbolism and points and parallels and everything that I just we need to go back through this because this episode was so good. It was so good. Oh my God, my heart is like I knew it. I knew as soon as he pulled up that house and we saw the weird angle from under the tire. I'm like, that's a weird shot. That's a weird. Why are we doing that? That seems suspicious. And then when it cut back again to it, I was like, what? You're drawing us attention to this. Why? And then the moment that you look out the window and realize the kids are in the van. But I'm like, why did you hold him for ransom if you were just going to blow it up? So we need to go back and look at that again to see that note that was on the bed. Like, we need to go back and look at that because that was. Guys. Oh my God. So we need to go back to this. First of all, the opening scene lasted so long in this episode. I forgot about the OP for so long. So we go back to the beginning where it's raining and we see Oda, like a younger version of Oda in a cafe or something reading this book. And I love the style of this scene. Like, it looks very like Victorian and it's so interesting. And this guy here, that the top half of him is in the shadows, like it's a clear, cool symbolism that we don't see him. And we see a young Oda and his face is blacked out as well. And he asks him about this book and he says, I've read it many times now. And here's the first thing, like this episode has so many good one-liners and so much, like you can tell this is from a light novel, I think, because the one-liners in it it's much more literary, if that makes sense. But he says there are so many more stories out in the world that are far more interesting than what's in that book. And he has parts 1 and part 2. He says, where's part 3? And he says, I don't have part 3. I've looked and looked, but I've never found it. And the guy seems relieved. He's like, oh, well, part 3, that story's the worst of the worst. So I wondered, one, there's a couple things to take from this conversation right off the bat. One, I wondered if it was like a fourth wall breaking thing, because we know now, or I know now, that this flashback are 4 episodes. And the first 2 episodes, things happened. And Oda was technically supposed to die at the end of the 2nd episode, but he didn't. And so he's in this 3rd part. And so if we're looking at this kind of like in a meta contextual thing, like the 3rd part, the 3rd episode is the worst of the worst. It ends the worst of the worst because all those kids die. I'm like, is that the author's way of being like, your story could have stopped last episode when you were supposed to die, but it didn't. So it's kept on going. So it's not going to be good. And then the 4th part's going to be whatever. Or because I get the idea from this episode and from the previous episodes with Oda that he's become kind of complacent with his position within the Port Mafia. Like, he's okay with it. Like, he's fine being the low-level person in the organization because that's kind of like a comfortable place for him. He gets to do things like go see the kids and do routine things, and he doesn't have to go out and do any extreme missions, even though he's definitely fully capable of it. So he's happy being at that part 2. He's happy living through these 2 parts of his life over and over again and doing this complacent thing because he's happy and comfortable there. And then when this guy says part 3 is the worst of the worst, like if he moves past that, what happens then? And this, in hindsight, is like a death flag, because at the end of this episode, I'm like, that whole complacency is just, it's thrown out the window now. And we'll talk about why here in a minute. And I've got some theories. I want to sort through this. But this dude in the shadow, so he tells him to write his own ending. You should consider yourself satisfied with just the first 2 parts. And I'm saying this for your own good. And he's like, I can't do that. And he's like, then write it. Then write the final part. Change the ending. Change what's supposed to happen. That way you can keep the story perfect. And he's like, who are you? And I love that line, to write a story is to write about a person and how that person should live and die. So you change the outcome of the story if you're not happy with it. And I don't quite understand, like, you have the qualifications. And he's like, who are you? And so of course, the show cuts and we're about to find out who it is. So I'm wondering if we find out next episode who he is. And I have, thinking about it, I had 2 theories in the moment. Because my thought is, I think Oda's going to die, and Oda's death is going to be what spurns Dazai to leave the Port Mafia, because he makes the comment to Akutagawa, which we'll talk about that. He makes the comment to Akutagawa that Dazai is his friend, and I feel like that term is not usually used by Oda or Dazai. So the fact that Oda is somebody Dazai looks up to quite a bit, I feel like Oda's death, when it happens, which I'm assuming is going to be next episode, is going to spurn Dazai to leave the Port Mafia. So my theories are, I've got 2 theories. One, there's a third option that this guy is not anybody we've ever met yet or know about. So that's option 3. But my one option was that it is the president of the agency, that it's the president, only because he'd be a member of the agency, and maybe Oda would tell Dazai about the agency before he dies or whatever, and that would spurn Dazai to go to them. But the president doesn't wear Western clothing. He wears very traditional Japanese garb, so that doesn't quite fit. And also, I was thinking, if it's the president, then why wouldn't they just show us his face? I mean, it could be a reveal, but it's like, why not go ahead and reveal it? So my other thought was that if it's not the president, maybe it's the Natsumi guy. That you guys have told me that Natsumi Sensei is important, and he's going to come up later with the permits and everything. And we've had that permit thing come up at the end of last season. So I was wondering, maybe it's the Natsumi guy, and he's connected to the agency, and we don't know what he looks like, so it could be him in the bowler hat. He kind of looks like Watson from Sherlock Holmes, the silhouette of him does. But it could be him. It could be him, and maybe that Natsumi character is what also convinced Dazai to join the agency. I don't know, since there's like a 6 degrees of Kasumi connection there, you know? I don't know, but that whole thing was interesting. And then the mosaic in the glass, like you see the colors of the mosaic filter through, and it's just like that bright optimism is what's symbolizing. And I really love that. Like, just the style of that scene was great. So, of course, Dazai rescues him. He gets treated for the poison. And Dazai kind of hints at the whole triple agent thing with the special ops, and he's like, don't worry about that now. The plot will explain itself later in the episode. Its mimic is the focus right now. And this whole conversation, there's so much with it too, because he brings up Akutagawa and that the other combat squad members are dealing with conflicts in the city. And Oda makes the comment of, Akutagawa, isn't he your subordinate? The one that has the highly offensive capabilities? Like, he's like, I've heard of him. I don't know him, but I know of him. High offensive capabilities. And this comment that Dazai said, he's a naked sword without a scabbard. Like, if that's not a description of Akutagawa, like, just so raw and unrefined, I'm sure he'll become the strongest gifted mafia member in the near future. But right now, he needs someone to teach him how to sheathe his blade. And that look for Oda like straightens up and like gives Dazai a weird look. And it doesn't seem like much, but I'm assuming that Dazai doesn't really talk about other people or his subordinates. And it looks like Dazai doesn't really talk about his other subordinates. So the fact that he's pointing out, one, that he knows a lot about Akutagawa, and he thinks highly of him because he thinks he's going to rise up through the ranks. But also, he's like, he needs someone to teach him how to sheathe his blade. He needs somebody to teach him how to control his anger and control his temper. And Dazai's like, I'm not the one to do it. And he's like, oh, sorry, that was a tangent. And Oda just kind of recognized it. Like, Oda can very much read Dazai. I feel like if anybody can read Dazai, it's Oda. And we've seen that in the first 2 episodes, but we've definitely seen it in this one, where he keeps giving Dazai just glances and certain looks. Like, he's trying to read what Dazai is saying, like, read between the lines. And it's so interesting. But yeah, this morning the Council of 5 Executives convened. And which I wish we could see the 5 executives. I'm assuming we will eventually in the present tense. And Dazai looks very concerned and tries to play it off when Oda grabs his guns. And Dazai's like, oh, hey, what are you doing? And he just looks like trying to hide that he's concerned. And Oda's like, we've got a problem. We got to go help them, right? And Dazai's like, oh, but you don't kill people, right? And Oda's like, this isn't about killing. It's about protecting our own. And that whole line about debts, another amazing line. He's like, I've acquired a lot of debts in my life. If your subordinates are in a tough spot, then they need help. And Dazai, that comment where he says, you should forget about your debts. No one remembers what you owe to them. Like, that's so good. Because he's like, because in a sense, Oda, I'm sure, takes Dazai's words as saying someone needs to help Akutagawa, and Oda has a bleeding heart. He's righteous. He wants to help others. And so Oda kind of takes it upon himself to go help in the mission. But Dazai's like, Oda, nobody remembers what you owe them. You're keeping all this guilt and all this, like, self-sacrificing nature to yourself that you have to fulfill all these debts. He's like, nobody cares what those debts were anymore. They are just appreciative that you helped. You don't have to repay anybody. And it's like, So, I like to think that Akutagawa you can tell Akutagawa in the past is definitely more of a live wire, loose cannon, does not think before he acts. And in this, he has a little bit more prowess. I think a little bit more prowess in the present time. It's good that his barrier's working now. But Gide, oh my god. Such a cool design. I love the red hair, the red eyes and the white hair. I love it. And, his power. Oh my gosh, we'll talk about that when we get up here. I'm rewatching the episode. The scene where this guy shows up, and I thought at first it was like a barrier power that he had. Like maybe he had a barrier because he was blocking Akutagawa's attacks, but he could see the attacks ahead of time. And so that was such strategy. Like when he does the barrier and to prevent the shot to the head, but he gets shot in the leg instead. That was such a cool scene. That was so cool. And I'm guessing Akutagawa learned from that moment because I'm pretty sure that during his fight with Atsushi, he created multiple barriers to prevent that sort of thing from happening. So clearly he's learned from what's happened to him 4 years ago. But yeah. So I just want to say, I have been curious about this whole people having the same ability since the start of this series. And I'm kind of like that with My Hero Academia too. That's what made me think about it, was that in My Hero Academia, people have quirks, which are kind of like the abilities in Bungo Stray Dogs. And in My Hero Academia, characters have similar quirks. They have quirks that are similar but different. They have a little variation, but they're in the same realm. And so ever since this show has started, I've kind of had in the back of my brain being like, I wonder if 2 characters could have similar abilities. If there would be abilities that would kind of be similar. And I didn't really think too hard about it because I'm like, well, there's lots of different stories, lots of different things that you can base stuff off of, so probably not. That makes this so cool that it makes sense why Ango was like, look, he has a powerful ability that's going to be bad for you. You both can do the same thing. You both can predict the future. And I love the expressions of people in this episode. The expressions where just the look on Gide's face when he sees... Because here's the thing. Oda could have killed him right then and there. His power wasn't activated. He wasn't looking into the future. He was so focused on Akutagawa, Gide was, and killing Akutagawa, that if Oda had shot to kill, he could have gotten rid of Gide in that moment. He could have gotten rid of him. But he didn't. And Gide's face where he's like, you could have stopped me. you could have killed me just now. Like that was his expression. And I paused it right here. If you get a chance, go to the episode and pause it right when Oda is about to pick Akutagawa up. Akutagawa's just kind of looking off to the side like, who the hell's this guy? And he just like lifts him up and just tosses him over his shoulder. Like what strength does Oda have to lift a grown man up and like carry off with him? And Gide is just smiling like, I found you. You're the one. And I got so frustrated in the next scene because Akutagawa, dude, I know that you are Notice Me Senpai. You are dead set on Dazai giving you notice. But dude, read the room. Like Oda is trying to save you. Why are you trying to fight with him? And Akutagawa has all this pride and hubris that he's like, you're low ranking. Why? I heard you're Dazai's friend. I want to be Dazai's friend. And Oda's like, look, I don't throw around that word lightly, friend. Well, then he says it in a minute. But Akutagawa, dude. I'm glad that it's not just at sushi that Akutagawa gets totally jealous and yandere about. It's also Oda, too. And he's just like, why does Dazai care about you? And Oda's just like, boom, done. Gotta knock you out, dude. And he says, are you the same? And I wondered about that. He said, are you the same? So I wonder if Akutagawa connected that him and Gide had similar abilities. I wonder if he connected 2 and 2. Because he didn't ever see, he hadn't seen Oda use his power. So I wonder. But this line, I have to bring you back. Especially for a friend who has high hopes for you. And here's the thing. This is the thing, too, about Dazai and Akutagawa. And Atsushi. The more, when I heard that line, because Oda can see through Dazai, he can see that Dazai does care about Akutagawa, one, because if he didn't care about Akutagawa, why would he focus so much on all of his problems and how to fix them? And two, he thinks high enough of Akutagawa that Akutagawa has a future. And so when you hear that, and Oda knows it, and we, the audience, now are privy to it as well, when you hear that, you're like, well, why did Dazai try to shoot him in the face last episode? And why is he so cruel to him? And it's really about the environment and the molding of it, to be honest. Because Dazai is like, the Port Mafia, if you don't do what you're supposed to, the Port Mafia will get rid of you. If you aren't useful, the Port Mafia will dispose of you. And so it's like a tough love thing where Dazai is like, if I don't get you to be a hardened person in this world, you're not going to, if you want to rise up through the ranks, you've got to become a hardened person like I am. Because you can be like Oda, and have a heart and be kind and compassionate, but you're not moving up the ranks. And he can tell Akutagawa has a power, an ability that will allow him to do so, and that Akutagawa wants to move up the ranks. So Dazai's like, okay, you want to do this? You got to do it the hard way, because this is how the Port Mafia is. And so it makes me think that the reason Dazai is so different with Atsushi then, in terms of his modeling and behavior, is because with the agency, that it's a totally different system. There's not rising up the ranks of the agency. All the agency members are members. They're not like executives. There's not this. There's a president who's the head, but then aside from the president, there's not really a ranking system. There's not executives. There's not a hierarchy. It's just the president and the members of the agency. And so Dazai can be more coddling, and I say coddling, he can be more compassionate and kind to Atsushi in his mentorship, because Atsushi isn't going to have to, the agency isn't going to kill Atsushi if he fails a mission. The agency isn't going to take off Atsushi's hands and legs if he doesn't do what they tell him to. With the Mafia, yeah, they might do that. They might kill you if you don't do a mission right. And that we kind of saw that with Mori and Higuchi and Akutagawa in season 1, because Mori was like, oh, well, he's in a coma. He may never wake up. And that's just it, So that line, one, when Oda says, I don't take that term friend lightly, but then he calls Dazai a friend. That's, one, he knows that Dazai cares about Akutagawa, and two, he has high hopes for him. So that whole line there, that was amazing. That was so good. So good. And then, how I loved when they both tried to use their powers at the same time, and it was starting to rewind and forward through time. When Ango talks about the singularity theory, it made me think of My Hero Academia, the singularity theory in there about quirks. But it's the idea that these powers can interact in weird ways. And since they're the same ability, they're just nullifying each other. So that was so cool that they're trying to just change each other's futures and it's not working because they're adjusting simultaneously. So that makes me think, like, does that affect the actual future? Like, it's getting some like time travel weird stuff happening, right? But yeah, oh my gosh. And then Oda, anytime a character says that they want to just live a quiet life by the sea, I'm like, you're gonna die. It's not gonna happen. And Oda, I love his ideals, but we'll talk about ideals in a minute. I love these ideals, but I'm like, dude, you say you're gonna get out of the Port Mafia? How? They're not gonna let you out. There's Mori and Dazai have both talked about how you could easily rise up the ranks and you have an impressive ability. And Dazai even later says that the only reason they were able to stop Gide at this point is because of Oda. They're not letting him out of the Port Mafia. No. So I'm like, Oda, that's cool that you have those ideals of becoming a rider by the sea, but how's that going to happen? And the guy, Gide, reminds me a lot of, in terms of ideologies, with the Azure Messenger. And that whole concept of ideals. And he's like, we have an ideal. We have had these. And we talked about we're possessed by ghosts. I don't think it's anything supernatural. I think it's the ghosts of, like, we're wartime criminals who are haunted by the people we've had to kill and the things we've had to do. And we just want someone to release us from this pain and suffering that we deal with, which will connect back to Dazai here in a little bit. But then Oda's like, that's not my view of life. He's like, you should enjoy life and you're in charge of how you die yourself, but you shouldn't just seek suicide. And which makes it very interesting with how he's a friend of Dazai's. But Oda, your ideals. That idealistic view of becoming a writer and saying, like, if I kill someone, then I can't write about lives if I take lives. So that's why I don't do it. And we'll touch back on that at the end of this episode, because that's why I'm like, it's just everything comes full circle in this episode. A man who takes lives cannot write about lives. And then that Humvee picks him up and pieces out. So, again, I'm going to say, the opening, y'all didn't have to go so hard in this OP. You really didn't. I'm so amazed. Like, one, that they did multiple openings for this flashback arc, but two, that the second opening was even more epic than the last one. Like, I like it even more. Like, holy crap, it's just so stylized. I'm like, guys, you didn't have to do that. But thank you. It's amazing. I love this OP so much. Yeah. So, again, y'all have told me to watch out for the cat. And, you've told me to watch out for the cat. I think, honestly, I don't know what the deal with the cat is, but I think it's a piece of surveillance equipment. And the only reason I thought that to begin with was because his eyes blink, and when his eyes blinked, the camera went off, like a camera like capturing a photo or capturing an image. So that's what made me think the first time that it was. But the other thing was that Dazai instantly knows that Ango is going to be at that bar, at the Lupin bar. And I'm like, how would you know that? Like, you could have a hunch, you could guess, but also that cat was right there beside him. So I'm like, is that cat surveillance? Is it not? Is the panda's not a panda? The cat is not a cat? I don't know. Don't spoil me. But that's just what I thought about it. But there's so many parts of this last section of the episode that are tragic and really take this episode on a tragic turn. And the one is when Dazai and Oda are talking on the way to the bar, and Oda's like, they're weird looking for war so that they can find a place worthy of their death. And Dazai's like, oh, are they weird? Their wish to be creative about their deaths is something I hadn't thought about. And that ties to Dazai's whole thing about suicide. Like, Dazai's so obsessed with this perfect suicide, the double suicide with someone. And it's kind of tragic because you're like, man, Dazai, I'm like, don't feed the flames, of what you're thinking about. But then we get the deal with Ango. And calling him a triple agent, we get confirmation that he's a member of the special ops that we've hinted at. And they hired him to become a Port Mafia member to gather intel. And then they hired him from there to be a spy for Mimic. So it's like I felt a little bit better about Ango at this point because I felt he was a little more trustworthy. And like maybe I have a feeling that we might see more of Ango, which I'm going to research his power next episode. at this point too. If we see Ango next episode, cool. If not, then maybe he shows up in the present. But if that's the case, that means Oda's dying, because they said someone died. And if it's not Ango, then it's probably Oda. I also liked the idea of the special ops. So we haven't gotten much on the special ops division, except they're pretty much in charge of Japan's. I like that the term that Dazai says, he's like, their job is to manage, not annihilate gifted users. And that kind of goes, the division, that kind of goes with that business permit that Natsume Sensei got. And that this organization in Japan, the way that the Japanese government and stuff works, is they don't want to kill gifted people, but they want to keep tabs on them and control them. And that's kind of where the mafia skirts away, because the mafia doesn't let themselves be controlled by the division that we know of. So that's interesting. But I thought for a second that Dazai was going to kill Ango right here and there, because he's like, how do you know you're getting out alive? And then Dazai decides to let him go. And this is where the second part of the tragedy comes in with Dazai. And the expressions in this episode are so good. And Oda's expression when Dazai's talking about losing things that he wants, like, that was so beautiful and tragic and sad. But Dazai saying, where's that line that he says? He says, it's sad. I'm not sad. I knew this from the beginning. Whether you were in the gifted special operations division or not, anything I would never want to lose is always lost. And he says, it is a given that everything that is worth wanting will be lost the moment I obtain it. And there's nothing worth pursuing at the cost of prolonging a life of suffering. And that's so tragic, because Dazai's just basically saying, anything good that happens in my life is taken away. Anyone good is happening, so it's just a given I'm going to lose it. That's how it's always been. There's nothing worth pursuing at the cost of prolonging a life of suffering, which connects to him being suicidal, which is really tragic, and the idea that he's so fickle with his life sometimes, because he's like, oh, if good things happen to me, it's just going to be taken away, which makes sense now why he wanted to take the picture. It wasn't that he could predict the future. He just was saying, oh, well, anytime something great happens to me, it ends. So we're having a great time now. We might as well take a picture of it, because something great's happening. That means it's going to be taken away. And that connects to his power being called no longer human, because how can you be human if you don't have any happiness or relationships? And then it's just like another death flag that Dazai really likes Oda and they're friends, and he's going to lose Oda. It's just, it's all there. It's all there, and I hate it. Thanks, I hate it. But yeah, that's so sad. And then Oda has that like visceral reaction of like his eyes just softening, and you can tell he feels so bad for Dazai, but you can't argue with it. And then Ango's trying to make things seem better. He's like, well, hey, if we get out from the port mafia and the division and become free men, then maybe one day we can all meet up. And Oda's like, just don't. Which is funny, because Oda said that exact same thing earlier in the episode, and it's almost like, don't jinx it, don't make this any worse. And then we have that silly photo. So yeah, this last scene, oh my god, he's got the food for the kids. And I'm telling you, the way they shoot this scene, as soon as you saw the tire tracks underneath it, I was like, that just doesn't seem right. Doesn't seem right. And it's too quiet. And then, of course, yeah, the whole place is trashed. The guy's dead. And then we get that damn shot of that tire again. And going up to see the kids, and I was like, do not show us a massacre of the kids being like slaughtered in the room, which they didn't. Good on them. But then we get something much worse. And okay, I want to pause it here. This note, it says, it has a word. It says like Newton, something. And there's a line and a knife sticking in a thing. And at first I thought it was a ransom note. Like maybe it said ransom, but it looks like a map. And I bet it's telling Oda where Gide is at. And we're going to get into that's the reason why Oda's going to die. Because then I thought that this bus with the kids was just going to drive off, and that Oda was going to try to chase after him, and it wasn't going to work. Wasn't going to work at all. And then, yeah, no, it just blows up. It just blows up. Yep. And I'm going to be honest, this episode, it almost got me. Bungo, you almost got me. I was welling up with some emotion there, especially the screaming part, when you realize that the screaming's him. Because at first I thought the screaming was like one of the kids, and I was like, oh, that's grisly and morbid. No, it's him screaming. That almost got me crying, guys. I'm not gonna lie. Because that goes back to the idea of debts. Like, his whole talk was about owing people and him owing those kids their lives, and he's been doing all this work to preserve their lives and make them happy because he thinks they're in a debt, and he's felt guilty for them being orphaned, and now it's his fault they're dead. It's his fault that they lost their lives because they used it to go back. And just that, him crying. And here's the thing, we cut back to that scene of the man, and it's now adult Oda. He says, I can no longer write a story. And then the man's gone, and the rainbow, the color of the mosaic is gone too. It's all black and white. And he's all alone. And he can't write a story anymore because he says, if I take lives, I can't write about lives. And so there's two ways you can look at this. One, he can't write a story anymore because his actions, his involvement with the Port Mafia has taken the lives of these kids, because I'm sure that Gide and Mimic and them targeted those kids knowing that he'd come back to see them. So there's that way of looking at it. And there's also, what I think is going to happen is he's going to go to Mimic and Gide now and try to kill Gide. And he can't write a story if he's taken a life. And I think that that's what's going to happen. He's going to try to take Gide's life in revenge for those kids dying and that man dying. And that's what's going to get him killed. Oh. You almost got me, Bungo. You almost got me. You almost got me crying at the end of that episode because I feel so bad for Oda. That was so freaking heartbreaking. So tragic. Thanks, I hate it. And then they cut to the episode title being Bungo Stray Dogs, which is the title of the whole series, and it's the last episode of the Flashback. Gee. Thanks. This has been the best episode, I think, of the whole series so far, for me. This has been, like, my favorite episode of the whole series. I mean, there's been funnier episodes. There's been episodes with more action. But in terms, like, this whole start of the second season has been my favorite arc so far. Which, really, we haven't gotten major arcs in season 1. There was the Azure Messenger arc, and there was, you could consider, there's not really been too many arcs in the first season. It's just been kind of like one-shot adventures with Atsushi getting to know each of the, other than the Azure Messenger arc, that two-parter, there's not really been a big arc, but this whole flashback has been my favorite part of Bungo Stray Dogs so far. I'm crushed. I'm going to need to go watch something a lot lighter after this to make up for that. Ain't going to be Attack on Titan, that's for sure. Oh, but guys, this episode was so good. So good. I really have enjoyed this. But, yeah. So, I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. By the time this gets onto YouTube and Patreon, I'll probably have watched the 4th episode, but please don't spoil me, just in case. But yeah, so good, guys. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. I don't know how I'm going to deal with the next episode. It's like one of those things where you know stuff's going to happen and stuff's going to come to a head, but you don't know how, and it's just like this feeling in my gut that's like, ugh, not good. So, I hope you have a great week, despite what we just watched. I hope you have a wonderful week. Stay safe. Take care. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but I'll be back next time with episode 4 of season 2 of Bungo Stray Dogs. Bye.